And welcome back, everyone. I am here today with my wonderful co host for Fiction Marketing Academy, a best selling author in his own right, and email marketing coach, Philip Duncan. Welcome, Philip.
What's up, man? I can't believe we're doing this right now, but yeah,
Yeah, exactly. It's very weird because we've been interviewing all these guests and now we're interviewing each other.
I know.
So yeah, but hopefully we'll have something interesting to say for you all. In this case, Philip. So we are going to talk about all things email marketing, right?
Yeah, I mean, if you want anything useful, that's probably the best direction to go.
Yes, we do. So let's start with a very. I mean, email marketing has been a top of mind for many coaches and so-called gurus for a long time. But I still think there's a lot to do and a lot to teach to people. So why is email marketing your number one sort of go-to tool when it comes to marketing? Why is it important?
Yeah, it's kind of like a two-sided answer for me. One, I was kind of drawn to email marketing a little bit stronger from the start because I don't do social media. Like, I'm not a social media guy. Like, I don't like being on social media. I don't like using social media unless I absolutely have to, which is rare. Um, so for me, it was kind of like a natural lean towards what I think is the other side of the equation, which is email marketing. And so it was kind of, that's kind of where I've always gone. But I've seen since doing it for a few years now, I think I've seen the power of, especially when you compare it to social media and stuff like that, just the engagement and the kind of relationships you can build with your audience, with your email list is so far and above anything you can do with social media in my personal experience. So anytime I talk to somebody, if it's new, if they don't know like which direction to go, I always try to tie a rope to their foot and pull them away from social media as hard as I can and hopefully get them into email marketing. Because I think both short term and long term, it's probably the most powerful tool for any author if utilized correctly.
Yeah, I think so too. It's just so powerful, and we're seeing this with the whole event we're hosting right now, also. And so in the title of your of this, when we decided this interview, you wanted to focus on authenticity. So why do you think is important, and why do you think it? How do you think it ties up with email marketing?
Yeah. So I think, I mean, you could go 100 different directions when it comes to like teaching and like implementing certain things with email marketing and stuff like that. But for me, it kind of always comes down to like being authentic, like because there's only one. It sounds so cliche. I don't even like saying it out loud because it sounds kind of like a nerd, but like there really is only one you in the entire world, and the best way to kind of separate yourself from the crowd, in my experience, in my opinion, is to just be yourself because I couldn't be Brian. Brian couldn't be me as much as he probably wants to be. Like he just is not it's just not gonna happen. Because like with all these different things and like you're competing in all these different areas as an author, like the easiest way to differentiate yourself is to be yourself. And I've seen it personal experience and I've seen it in other authors where they try to like attach themselves to somebody they look up to or somebody they're following and it just doesn't fit their style and like who they are as a person, and I think that can just cause a lot of issues. I've done it myself early on. I think there's a lot more downside to that than upside versus tapping into who you are as a person, showing people in your audience on your email list who you are as early as you can and as often as you can. I think I just think authenticity is just like a superpower, and kind of a, I don't know how else to explain it. It can be a superpower if you do it right. So yeah,
Yeah.
I don't know if that answers your question or not,
Yeah, yeah,
but
sure. I think especially because we're focusing on fiction, do you find it difficult sometimes, or do you see people actually having a bit of difficulty because when you are a fiction author, you're kind of, oftentimes you kind of become someone else as you've got your author persona, your author sort of profile. Do you find it difficult for people to keep their authenticity when they're emailing as the author persona or not?
yeah, that's a great question. I don't know if anybody's ever asked me that question. So that's a really interesting way to look at it. I haven't seen it. I guess it could be like an issue for people. I guess the way I would think about that is if somebody writes like under a pen name and like in a sense of like they're trying to separate their writing from like who they actually are because for some reason people just like to be anonymous about that. Um, I guess if the way you wrote was vastly different from who you actually are as a person, I guess it could be weird, but I have never run into that. But then you could just tap into, who would you consider yourself as an author if you're going to be like taking on this different persona as you were mentioning. Um, but other than that, what I have found a lot of times is even with fiction, because it is weirder with fiction, it can be a little trickier, is despite you writing fiction and making worlds up or characters, like whatever it is, like some part of your personality and who you are as a person is going into your writing. So you just try to tap into that when you're writing your emails and trying to connect with your audience. Um, and there are examples and stuff that to make it more specific, but like just because you're writing fiction doesn't mean you can't actually like tap into who you are as a person and being authentic. Cause for me, it just translates over really well from who I am into my writing, just style, wording, characters I create, like it's all kind of intertwined. So then it becomes kind of easier to express that in your email marketing. And it gets easier as you go along. It might be intimidating and hard at first, but as you get used to it and you put reps in, it just gets easier.
Yeah, I think if you're creating a pen name that is so far away from who you really are, it's going to be hard to be consistent in what you do and what you say. I think it's always going to be easier if you create a pen name, or even if you write it yourself, because your personality and what your true self are going to shine through. Much better if you're not trying to make up things. So I think one of the key things here is, tying it up to email marketing is the content of your emails. And I know one of the biggest problems for people is what do I email my list, especially in between launches, because a lot of people, they email today because it's the launch, and then they email again in 2 months because it's another launch if you're writing pretty fast. But what do you suggest for authors in terms of content?
Yeah, I get that question a lot actually, because people are always like, if my book's not coming out or if I don't have anything to mention with my writing, like, what do I say to people? I'm like, well, first off, don't ever just let them sit there and not hear from you because that's how email lists go cold. And if you go months and months without responding, like if let's say you write 2 books a year, so you're sending like let's just say 4 emails a year because you're sending like a pre-launch, a launch for that book, and then a pre-launch and launch for the next book, and you do that every year. Like your audience needs to hear from you much more often than that. Typical frequency is like once to twice a month, just for regular authors. It could be you could make it different for you if you don't like either one of those frequencies, but that's just the most common one. But I just use stories like especially as a fiction author, like I'm just telling stories about like something that's happened in my life. I just like the other day I just wrote, I met a homeless man and somebody we I coached a soccer team for my 5-year-old daughter, and one of the little girls on there, her mom just got diagnosed with cancer, so we're watching their baby a couple times a week. Like it doesn't have to be so specific to your books like a launch or something. Now if something like that is around that time, of course you want to mention like a book launch or tie it back into your writing somehow. But the way I connect the best with my audience, just from personal experience, is just telling stories, giving them a glimpse into my life, something that's happened, showing them who I actually am, and just connecting. And a lot of times, the way that works is the person on the other end reading your email will respond back to you, either telling you what they thought about your email, sharing a similar experience with you, which just builds rapport, and you're just going back and forth with that person, which plays multiple benefits. But yeah, I mean, you don't have to have something to say every time you email because then you probably won't email that often. So just tell stories. I mean, it's not that hard.
Yeah, and I think especially as a fiction writer, is supposed to come quite easy to you.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, what would you say to people? I mean, I'm guilty of this sometimes. The worry that they might be emailing too frequently. They worry about unsubscribes and thing. And I know you're laughing because we've had this conversation because I am really worried about unsubscribe sometimes. So, what is your what would you say to these people?
Yeah. To all you sensitive Sallys out there. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, listen, I used to have that same worry. And but yeah, it cracks me up when you mention that because me and you've had this conversation before. And I'm like, dude, you gotta buck up, man. Like, it's not the end of the world. So the way I look at it, and maybe this is excuse me, I gotta catch my throat, different than some people, but I see this a lot. And even conversations I have with like affiliates and partnerships of ours and stuff like that is if somebody's gonna unsubscribe from you, it doesn't matter if it's the first email or if it's the thousandth email you send them. At some point, that person no longer belongs in your audience, in your world. So every time somebody unsubscribes from my email, and I'll tell you right now, I email pretty frequently, both my fiction list and my like business side of the list. It's very, very rare that I send an email and not and at least one person unsubscribes. Like there's always going to be one person most likely that's going to be like, this is the last email I want to see from this person. And you'll most likely never know why. Unless, you'll get the occasional email back to you saying why they unsubscribed, which is always fun. But it's not, I don't care about unsubscribes. I really don't. Because if you're doing it right, you're adding people to your list anyways, and you're trying to add the right people. So every time somebody leaves, I just look at them as either they're not the right fit for me, or whatever I had to give them for them to use, or it's up. There's no need for them to be here anymore. So if you're worried about sending an email and getting unsubscribes, it's gonna happen. So you got to get over it and look at it as like a blessing, because you don't want those people on your list. If they're willing to unsubscribe and they don't, they're going to mark you as spam. You're going to end up in their junk or promotional folders. They're never going to open your emails. So your open rates and click rates are going to, plummet. So anytime they leave, you're like, oh, thank goodness you left. You weren't supposed to be here anyways. That's the way I look at it. And me and you have this conversation all the time. And it's so
Yeah.
funny.
Yeah,
So
and also I always remember once I sent a couple of years ago, I sent a link to something, and I realized after that it was the wrong link. So I wrote another email saying, "Oops, that was the wrong link. This is the correct one," and I had 10 unsubscribes. What have I done wrong there? I mean, and so it's just something that happens. I'm pretty convinced, but like you said, I'm still not there yet in terms of my mindset. So okay, unsubscribes a bit of a less important metric. Is there any metric that you feel is very important, or are we just not worrying too much about the data?
yeah, for me, and I've tried to reassess how I look at this because I, like you probably, and maybe a lot of people on here listening, is like I subscribe to a lot of email like newsletters and stuff like that, both in like the authoring world and also like just the business world in general. And I see some people who are really high up knowing what they're talking about, talking like metrics don't matter, open rates, could care less or couldn't care less. If I have they're more interested on like click rates, like if somebody actually clicks on a link, which is really important because if somebody opens your email and they don't do anything, whatever. If somebody opens your email and clicks through, that's more important because that just gets them the next step further along with whatever journey you're trying to put that person through. But in terms of, I do look at open rates as important, just personally, because it's like at the very least, that's showing me how many people are actually opening and possibly reading my email. It doesn't mean they are reading your email, but the chances are they probably are, at least the majority of them. So I think open rates, I mean, if you have a really low open rate, I think that would at least tell you there's some adjustments you need to make and there's something that's not clicking. That could be you got the wrong audience. Maybe you're landing in a bunch of like, maybe you're not landing in people's inboxes like you should and stuff like that. But if you have a pretty healthy open rate, then which I'm looking like, industry standard and stuff like that. I think anything over 30% is pretty good. Because I see a lot of people who are lower, a lot of people who are higher, but like if you can get that 30 to 40+% open rate, I think that's a good place to be. And then just some things to watch out for is hopefully your spam complaints are low and stuff like that, because that can hurt your like email health, like deliverability and stuff like that. But I've never really seen that be a problem as long as you're doing things correctly. So yeah, I wouldn't get too hung up on them, but if some numbers seem really low, like your open rate and stuff like that, that might be kind of a cue to reassess and readjust some things.
Yeah, and on the spam topic, I think these email service providers these days do an excellent job of sort of avoiding that. Just for people who don't know, you're not supposed to be sending emails from your Gmail account or Yahoo account to your whole list. There are platforms out there that can help you with this, um, and they can help you with all the email marketing kind of journey. So capturing emails, sending emails, and all of that. Going back to the content of the emails, I've asked this a few people, and I've always had different answers. What do you think about sharing insights into your life as a writer? Like, I don't know, hello folks. Today I wrote 5,000 words in my new novel. Blah blah blah. This is my keyboard of choice and things like that.
Yeah, I think that works. Because that's just that kind of goes back to my earlier point of just that personal touch. Because all that's doing is showing people kind of into your world, which when you get like your hardcore fans, like your super fans, people that like want to stay with you, the kind of the cliche term in our world is raving fans, as we know, which is I don't like saying that either, but um when you get those people and you get enough of those people, that's where things can really take off. And they love personal touches. What did you do today? Or what was your routine for your writing? How far along are you in your new? I see Mark Dawson do this all the time where he gives updates on his books in terms of like, I'm 60,000 words through on John Milton's 800th book. I don't know how many books he's written now, but like
Pretty
whichever
much.
one's coming out, yeah.
Yeah.
And then he's like, here's the mock cover, or here's what the cover could be. It could change. The pre-order set for fall of 2024, but it'll be out much sooner. Like he gives these kind of small updates. I've seen him do mentions of like him renovating his like outdoor barn into his new writing space and podcast space, stuff like that. I think people eat that up because we know his following's pretty big and pretty loyal. So if you're on enough email lists and stuff like that, just see what other people are doing. And you can get a pretty good sense of what's working and what's not just based on like what you're seeing as like a pattern and stuff like that. I used to do it more in terms of my writing, like showing people insight to my writing. I've kind of gone away from that, and I'm more into just personal stories of myself and my life and stuff like that. It's just what I've gotten into, like I just what I've been writing recently. But I do like the whole touch points of, here's the keyboard I use. I don't know about that. Here's my normal routine. I wake up at 4, I drink a cup of coffee, I write 2,000 words, I walk my dog. I like you can do that stuff. And I think you'll get but I think more importantly, let me put it this way, you'll get a sense of what your audience likes and doesn't like as you get used to it. Just because somebody else is doing it doesn't mean you should or it could work for you. Just test things out. Like share different things, see what responds, see what people are replying back to based on what you're sharing and stuff like that. And I think that'll give you a pretty good direction of what your audience is looking for in terms of, hearing from you.
Yeah. And same thing again about content. I've heard a lot of people say you should always have, this is more especially in marketing kind of emails, but you should always have or leave the subscriber with something to do, so an open question at the end or something to click or something. Does this also work for fiction, or maybe not?
No, I'm the same way. Yeah, I think call to actions or CTAs, simple. Like they don't need to be complicated, and typically you don't need to give them more than one because humans have a very small attention span enough as it is. So if you try to take them more than one direction, it's going to be complete and utter chaos. Um, so yeah, you can do that in a number of ways. You can say, hey, if you haven't checked out my debut novel or my newest book yet, you can click here, go check it out. You can ask a simple question, stuff like, who's your favorite author you're reading right now? What kind of books are you into? If you've read one of my books, what'd you think about? Like, you can ask these simple questions, just keep it to one action typically. And because that's going to hopefully create engagement back to you, which does one of two things, or what does two things that are really important is it helps you create relationships with people on your list, which is very, very important. And two, once your email service provider sees that you are corresponding with that other person, the email, like your email deliverability health goes up, and the chances of you landing in their inbox every single time is probably near 100%. As opposed to them like seeing somebody's never opening your email or never clicking on a link. Like when you create that engagement, it's kind of like a double-edged sword and benefits and kind of relationship building and the health of your email list, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah, totally. So going back to the authenticity topic, I know you're big on collaboration with other authors, and I know, for example, I was watching your interview with Evan Gao, Story Origin. How does that play into collaboration with other authors and email, and what can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so one of the reasons why that's so important is it's not just the collaboration aspect, it's collaborating with the right people. So for me, I write like fast-paced thrillers. Right now they have like a military element to it. So it's like I'm going after people who write similar books to me. It doesn't have to be exact, but like people in the thriller, suspense, action, crime kind of genre. Because the chances are they've got people on their email list that could belong in my email list as well, and vice versa. So I could have people on my list that could belong. So when you cross, promote or you collaborate with these other authors, all you're doing is basically kind of cross pollinating each other's email list. And this is the whole game of how you grow your email list. If you have 0 people, like this is how you do it. You go and find other authors in the similar or same genre as you. You guys go into this group promotion. So like the interview you're referring to is Evan Gao over at Story Origin. So I use Story Origin all the time. And basically you're just getting people from their list to your list. And then if you have people on your list, you're reciprocating and sending your people back to them. And this is how authors on both ends grow when you just do this long enough and continuous, and your list will just continue to grow. But like I can't see how you could do this by yourself. If there's no collaboration and there's no cross promotion, and you're like this lone wolf who is just determined to do it with nobody's help, good luck. Like you're gonna be screwed, either now or down the road. So yeah, that's a great question. Collaboration and cross promotion is so important.
Yeah, this takes me to another interview that I remember, which I did to Matty Dalrymple. And we were talking about essentially how to pitch yourself, how to pitch your book, and how to promote yourself and get the name out there. And for example, with email, when we are sending the famous launch emails or my book is out, um, what is your recommendation there? Because a lot of people are going to struggle, say, they struggle with the actual idea of saying go buy my book or go leave me a review.
Um, so what was the question is how do you kind of structure those emails to people?
Yeah, what should you focus on, and how should you get over the fear of sort of promoting yourself and
Okay.
asking people?
I might have zoned out when you were talking there. Okay. Yeah. So it kind of goes back to kind of the similar situation of like, oh, I don't want to send an email because people are going to unsubscribe. Like, I get it. At some point, though, you just gotta. This sounds so terrible, and I don't mean this bad, but like, you just gotta suck it up and you just gotta go for it because that's the only way you're going to learn. If you don't try, basically, it's the whole saying: if you never ask, the answer is always going to be no. Now, I get it. We're fiction authors. We're not hardcore salesmen or saleswomen. Like this isn't. We're not out here trying to like hard sell people every email. But like a launch is so important, and if you get that right, it can be really really beneficial. And if you get it wrong, it can suck. So it's like I think it's enough. I think you just have to go, study what other people are doing and test out. You're not going to get it right probably the very first time or, nail it perfectly the very first time, but you just have to kind of keep evolving your system and your method and just you'll get more comfortable with it. You you just got to try to like stop thinking of, oh, I'm going to offend people. I'm going to upset like you're never going to make everybody happy. Okay? Like it's never gonna happen. So you at some point you just have to do it. So, I don't know how else to say it besides you just have to suck it up and you just have to test methods and get used to it and refine because it's never gonna be perfect the first time or really ever, but you'll get used to it and again, to circle back to Mark Dawson, like he's nailed down a system. Now, every time he's in pre-launch, launch, and post-launch mode, the guy knows exactly what he's doing from A to Z. Do you think he started out knowing how to do that? Absolutely not. He had to learn, implement, and he's probably changed things here and there until he got a system that really works for him. And that comes from studying, learning, watching sessions, attending summits, like just investing into your authoring. Um, whether that's in a free aspect or you're paying for information and stuff like that. Because, like I said before, if you try to do it by yourself, you're screwed. You have to learn from these people. I know that's not a really specific answer,
No,
but
no, it's
like
great.
you have to learn from these people and figure out what works for you. Because if you don't take action, like there's nothing I can do for you. There's nothing Brian can do for you. There's nothing anybody can do for you.
Yeah, and I one thing I found useful is also for my marketing emails and things like that is keeping what I call a swiped file of whenever I receive an email and I think this is actually a really good email or things like that, I just save it. And it's not to say obviously don't go and copy it word for word, but have it there as as inspiration or you know, kind of get the ideas going for you. Um, one thing I wanted to ask you back in when it comes to metrics, does it matter at all? One of the biggest questions ever: list size. Does it matter at all? Do you need to have a huge list to be successful as an author? What's your opinion?
Yeah, great question. I think it's kind of like a yes and a no answer. I think obviously the bigger your list is and the more people in your world, assuming they're the right people, the better it's going to be. We know this from a business aspect is email list is so important and crucial in terms of ROI and marketing different things, testing ideas. Like, so the bigger your list, the better you're going to be. And typically the more money you're going to make. That's kind of the same way with your authoring email list too. It's like if me and you wrote the exact same book, but I had 1,000 people and you had 10,000 people, like the chances of you making more money and being more successful essentially is 10x mine, even though it's not exactly those numbers. But like, yeah, you should have as many people on your email list as you can. And that's why it's important to keep growing it and getting more people on and more people on, because also people are going to be filtering out. So you're going to have to replace those bums that decided to leave in the first place. But I don't think you have to have the biggest list in the world to be successful. I've said this in other interviews before, and I've mentioned it on my email list before, is like, I'd rather have like 500 of the right people versus 5,000 of just everybody and their mom and sister. Like, I don't need a bunch of Aunt Janes and Cousin Joes. And like, I want 500 really targeted people. This is just a number. These aren't like hard number. Like, I'm just using it as an example. You want more of the right people, or you would rather take fewer of the right people than more of just the mass of everybody, because your book's not for everybody. You're not grabbing everybody out there because that's just not going to work. You could have 100,000 people on your email list, but if 90% of them don't belong there, you don't really have 100,000 person email list when you're sending out marketing emails and stuff like that. So yeah, list size does and doesn't matter. I know that's a crazy way to answer that. But it's all about having the right people. You can be very successful with a smaller list if you're the kind of person who connects with your audience and they're the right people on there and they really love you. You know, we know this in the marketing world is the know, like, and trust factor. Do the people on your email list know who you are? Do they like you? And do they trust you? If you have enough of those people, it doesn't really matter how big or small your list is, you're going to be okay.
Yeah, I learned that myself. Even with my agency, the list is very small, and you know the list that is for the agency specifically. But whenever I send something there, it's very engaged because I know that people want to hear from me about ads, and so I know immediately what to say, and I know that they will respond essentially. So
Exactly.
yeah. So, what about? I'm going to ask you two questions now. One for complete beginners and one for a bit more advanced people. Complete beginners. What would you say is the most effective way in, let's say, even 2024 or going forward, to start building your email list? Is it still the reader magnet? and things like that? Or have you found it's changed a bit lately?
I mean, I don't know of another method of getting people on your email list as an author besides a reader magnet, because I don't see I don't see what other piece of information would be valuable enough for somebody on the other end to give you their personal information, which is their name and email. So yeah, 100%, 2023, 2024, 2057. Like, I think a reader magnet, getting people onto your list, that's how you're going to do it. And just to kind of clarify, if I'm talking to the beginner person here, is all a reader magnet is, and if you know this, like, there's a good chance you do know, it's just a piece of your writing, the style you write, the voice, the kind of stories you write. It needs to match what your actual books are that you've published or are going to publish, because you want to grab the right people from the beginning. Um, you wouldn't, for example, you wouldn't write a romance reader magnet if you published thriller books. That makes zero sense. They could have romance elements, but like, you want to make sure it matches exactly who you're going after. But yeah, 100% reader magnet. I don't see another method of getting the right people on your list without that, because other than that, who's going to give you their email without something in return? It's just not usually the case.
Yeah. And for the little bit more advanced people, how have you seen they deal with email marketing, especially when you have like 4 books, 5 books? Is it all a matter of starting to play with automations and starting to pitch your, book two, book three? How have you seen people who have more than one book and maybe quite a few out there manage their email well, essentially?
Yeah, so that's a great question, because as you become more established and you continue on through your journey and you're not really at that beginner stage anymore, you have more books out there for people to read. And let's say, for example, you have 5 books. I'm hoping, as a fiction author, this is a series. Um, I've dealt with people who've written several books that weren't in a series. I'm just like, oh, I wish I could have got a hold of you like 2 years ago. We could have just, you'd be on a much better path right now. Because the whole goal of an author is, you're not one off in these books. Like, you need to have a reason for them to take book one, and then you connect that and they read through your entire series. Again, to circle it back to Mark Dawson, the dude is still writing John Milton books, for goodness sakes. There's like 25 of them now. Jack Reacher, I mean, those books are still out. Um, I mean, you just got to think, Harry Potter, there was what, 8 of those bad boys or whatever. I don't know. Like, you need to have a series. So then when you're marketing it, um, and it could be one of two ways. Some people write in a chronological series. So it's like book one ties into book two, ties into book three, ties into book four. And there are people who are like, it's a character series. So like Jack Reacher, for example, he's solved a crime and, figured out who the murderer was in book one. And then book two is still Jack Reacher, but it's a whole different case. So then it doesn't really matter where they leap into. Um, so you could, I guess, essentially market them to any book that's coming out. So like, if you just released a new book and you're like book 15, but it's not chronological, you could just say, hey, the newest book's out, number whatever. If you've never read a book before, I recommend book one, so you get an introduction to the character and who that is, and hopefully they're like, this book's awesome, and they just read all of them, and then that's where your money comes in as an author, is that read through.
Yeah, I see that with ads all the time. I have zero clients, and I've had zero clients who make money in fiction on Amazon with only one book. Zero. All of them have started making money after book two or even book three. And the money is made on those books because once they get people in with a free book, for example, maybe book one is free, then you can pitch book two, book three, and then you can make money and sort of factor in the cost of the ads and everything else. Then you can you can start to turn a profit.
Yeah, because if you just have one book and you're running ads to that one book, which I wouldn't recommend to people, unless you're just testing and you just have disposable income for some reason and you're just burning a hole in your pocket, is all you're going to be doing is you're just going to be going negative ROI on that first. Unless you're a unicorn, or you've caught lightning in a bottle and your book takes off and it becomes a movie, and then, like, of course one book's going to work, but that's not going to happen to you unless you're the 0.0001% author. So like, as a series, in terms of ads, the way I would look at it, and I don't know, I'm not the expert here, but like, book one, whether it's free or it's 99 cents, you're looking at it as you're going to be taking a loss on that book, or at very best breaking even in hopes of them reading through, and that's how your ROI becomes positive. So yeah, series is absolutely crucial, especially for fiction authors, more so for fiction authors, I believe.
Yeah, again, like I said, for us it's all series. I think it's a bit like the Netflix effect, they call it. Whenever somebody finishes book one, they immediately want book two, book three.
That's right.
And so I've had a few clients who didn't publish anything before they had written book three or book four, and then they sort of published them in a sort of an interval, so they had the content there to please the fans immediately, and they didn't have to struggle with that.
That's pretty
Cool.
smart.
So yeah, it's very smart actually. And I mean, some authors do this, but then they are a little bit stuck when it comes to read through and sell through, which I think are two very important, well, essential metrics in fiction. Some authors that I work with didn't have an idea of what their sell through is. And when you sort of, again, have to make all these calculations for advertising and things like that, it is essential to know. Um, but I think the more content you have, I know I'm talking about it like content and products, but the more books you have out there is always the best. And also because maybe you can have one and use it as a reader magnet and things like that. Um, a lot of words is never a problem. It might be a problem when you don't have enough because you might lose some readers. Okay, cool. Any final recommendation you'd like to give the awesome attendees of our event?
Yeah, if I guess I'll give two pieces of advice here. I'll give one for the beginner and one for somebody more established. For the beginner, if you don't have an email list yet, or you're kind of tiptoeing your way into it, just get started. It's not going to be perfect, but if you don't get started, you'll never learn and grow, and it's never going to become anything that you want it to become. So you just have to jump in and get started, and then you'll learn, I promise. And then for people who are more established, just make sure you're nurturing your list, you're engaging with them, you're creating relationships with these people, and then you're just continuing to add the right people to your list, so your authoring career can continue to go in the trajectory that you're wanting it to go. But yeah, I just think whether you're getting started or you're more established, an email list is 100% crucial.
Very good. Thanks ever so much, Philip. It was great to have you in this session. Again, I still feel weird interviewing you, but
I
I'm
know.
sure it was it was very insightful, and I did learn quite a lot. So thanks again for being with us.
You the man.
Thanks, guys, and don't forget to check everything, all the links and all the rest around this video, and I'll see you in the next session.